Have you ever noticed how the people who tell you money doesn't matter are usually the ones who never seem to have any? Meanwhile, the wealthy quietly follow a completely different set of rules that nobody bothered to teach the rest of us. It's almost like there's an invisible manual for staying broke that society handed you at birth. And you've been following it religiously without even realizing it. My name is Nick, and I've spent years studying why some people effortlessly build wealth while others work twice as hard and somehow end up with less money than when they started. What I discovered will probably make you uncomfortable, but it might also change your entire financial future. The truth is, you've been systematically programmed to remain poor through 7 specific behaviors that feel completely normal, but are actually financial quicksand. These aren't just bad habits or poor choices. These are deeply ingrained patterns that have been reinforced by everyone around you. From your family to your friends to the media you consume daily. The scary part is that most people never recognize these patterns, which means they spend their entire lives trapped in a cycle of financial mediocrity while wondering why nothing ever changes. But here's what makes this different from every other financial advice video you've watched. I'm not going to tell you to stop buying coffee or cancel your streaming subscriptions. Those tips are fine, but they're treating symptoms while ignoring the disease. Today, we're going after the root cause of why most people stay broke. And I guarantee at least 5 of these 7 programming patterns are currently running your financial decisions without you even knowing it. The first way you've been programmed to stay poor is believing that wanting money makes you greedy or shallow. This is probably the most destructive financial belief you can hold. And it's been drilled into your head since childhood. How many times did you hear phrases like money is the root of all evil, or rich people are selfish, or there are more important things than money growing up? Here's the twisted psychology behind this programming. Society needs workers who will accept low wages and not question the system. If everyone believed they deserved to be wealthy, who would work the jobs that keep the economy running? So instead, we're taught that being content with less is virtuous, that struggling financially builds character, and that people who pursue wealth are somehow morally inferior. But let's examine what actually happens when you reject money as a goal. You end up stressed about bills, unable to help family members in need, and constantly making decisions based on what you can afford rather than what would actually improve your life. Meanwhile, the people who embrace wealth building have the freedom to be generous, to pursue meaningful work, and to create positive change in the world. The second programming pattern is even more insidious because it disguises itself as responsibility. You've been taught to prioritize security over opportunity, which sounds perfectly reasonable until you realize that what most people call security is actually just a comfortable form of financial imprisonment. Think about the traditional life path you were probably encouraged to follow. Get good grades, go to college, find a stable job, work for 40 years, and retire at 65 with hopefully enough money to survive. This path promises security, but what it actually delivers is complete dependence on systems you can't control. Your employer can fire you, the economy can crash, inflation can destroy your savings, and suddenly that security you thought you had disappears overnight. Meanwhile, people who build real wealth understand that true security comes from having multiple income streams, owning assets that generate passive income, and developing skills that create value regardless of economic conditions. But you were never taught to think this way because employees who believe their job is their only option are much easier to manage and control. The third way you've been programmed to stay poor involves your relationship with debt. And this one will probably make you angry once you see how it works. You've been conditioned to view debt as normal, even necessary for achieving basic life goals. There is want a car. Sorry, take out a loan. You want an education? Student loans are just part of life. Want a house? A 30-year mortgage is the only realistic option. This programming is so effective that most people never question why they're paying thousands of dollars in interest for things they could potentially afford to buy outright if they plan differently. The financial industry has convinced you that monthly payments are more important than total cost, which is exactly backwards from how wealthy people think about money. Consider this example. The average car payment in America is over $700 per month. Over 5 years, that's $42,000 plus interest for something that loses value the moment you drive it off the lot. But instead of questioning this system, most people simply accept it as the way things work and focus on whether they can afford the monthly payment. Wealthy people, on the other hand, understand that every dollar paid in interest is a dollar that can't be invested in appreciating assets. They either buy reliable used vehicles with cash or they use debt strategically to acquire assets that generate income rather than expenses. The fourth programming pattern is perhaps the most subtle but also the most dangerous. You've been taught to think like a consumer instead of an investor, which fundamentally changes how you view every financial decision. When you see money, your first instinct is probably to think about what you can buy with it rather than what you can build with it. This consumer mindset has been carefully cultivated through decades of advertising and cultural messaging. You're constantly exposed to messages about deserving nice things, treating yourself, and living for today. And the entire economy depends on people spending money on depreciating assets rather than investing in appreciating ones. But here's what happens when you shift from consumer thinking to investor thinking. Instead of asking, "Can I afford this?" you start asking, "What will this cost me in terms of future wealth?" Instead of seeing money as something to spend, you see it as something that can work for you. Instead of buying things that lose value, you start acquiring things that gain value over time. The fifth way you've been programmed to stay poor is through your relationship with time. And this might be the most tragic one because time is the one resource you can never get back. You've been taught to trade time for money in a linear relationship, which means your earning potential is artificially capped by the number of hours you can work. This programming starts early. In school, you learn to show up at a specific time, follow a schedule, and exchange your time for grades. Later, this translates into showing up at a specific time, following company policies, and exchanging your time for wages. You're never taught to think about leveraging your time or creating systems that work without your constant presence. Wealthy people understand that true wealth comes from creating systems, building assets, and developing income streams that aren't directly tied to their personal time investment. They focus on working smarter rather than harder. But most people never learn this because the education system and traditional employment structure reinforce the time for money exchange. The sixth programming pattern involves your social environment. And this one is particularly challenging because it often involves people you care about. You've been surrounded by people who reinforce broke thinking patterns. And attempting to break free from these patterns often triggers resistance from your social circle. This happens because your financial success makes other people uncomfortable about their own choices. When you start building wealth, investing money, or talking about financial goals, the people around you might respond with skepticism, jokes, or outright discouragement. They'll tell you you're being unrealistic, that you should be content with what you have, or that you're becoming obsessed with money. The seventh and final way you've been programmed to stay poor is through your beliefs about what's possible for someone like you. You've internalized limiting beliefs about your own potential based on your background, education level, or current circumstances. This programming is so effective that you'll sabotage your own success even when opportunities present themselves because deep down you don't believe someone like you deserves to be wealthy. These limiting beliefs show up in countless ways. Maybe you think you need an MBA to start a business, so you never try. Maybe you believe investing is only for people who already have money, so you keep your savings and accounts earning practically nothing. Maybe you think wealthy people got lucky or had advantages you don't have, so you never seriously pursue wealth-building strategies. The most insidious part of this programming is that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you don't believe success is possible for you, You don't take the actions that would make it possible. You don't educate yourself about money. You don't take calculated risks, and you don't persist when things get difficult. Then, when you inevitably don't achieve financial success, it reinforces your belief that wealth wasn't meant for people like you. But here's what this programming doesn't want you to know. Most wealthy people didn't start with special advantages or secret knowledge. They simply refused to accept limiting beliefs about what was possible for them. They educated themselves, took action despite uncertainty, and persisted through failures that would cause most people to quit. Now, recognizing these programming patterns is just the first step. The real challenge is deprogramming yourself, which requires you to actively fight against decades of conditioning. This isn't easy because these patterns feel normal and comfortable. They're reinforced by almost everyone around you. And breaking free often means going against social expectations. The deprogramming process starts with changing your internal dialogue about money. Instead of thinking, "I can't afford it," start asking, "How can I afford it?" Instead of saying, "I'm not good with money," start saying, "I'm learning to be better with money." Instead of believing, "Rich people are greedy," start recognizing that wealth gives you more power to help others and create positive change. You also need to actively seek out different influences. Stop consuming media that reinforces broke thinking patterns and start learning from people who have actually built wealth. Read books by successful investors. Think about how this shows up in everyday conversations. When someone mentions they're starting a side business, the immediate response for most people is to list all the reasons it won't work. When someone talks about investing, people love to bring up their uncle who lost money in the stock market 20 years ago. When someone suggests real estate investing, everyone becomes an expert on market crashes and maintenance nightmares. This programming runs so deep that you'll actually feel uncomfortable around people who have more money than you do. Instead of being curious about how they built their wealth, you'll assume they got lucky, inherited money, or did something unethical. This assumption protects your programming by maintaining the belief that wealth isn't accessible to normal people like you. Here's where it gets really twisted. The same people who taught you that money doesn't matter will be the first ones to ask you for financial help when they need it. Your parents who told you not to be materialistic will expect you to help with their retirement. Your friends who mocked your investment goals will want to borrow money when emergencies arise. Your siblings who called you obsessed with money will assume you'll cover family expenses because you're the one who actually has savings. But the programming doesn't stop with your beliefs about money itself. It extends to your beliefs about work, success, and what constitutes a worthy life. You've been taught that working hard is more important than working smart, that suffering builds character, and that easy money is somehow less legitimate than money earned through struggle. This explains why people will spend 40 years in jobs they hate, commuting to offices they dread, working for bosses they can't stand, all while telling themselves they're being responsible and mature. Meanwhile, someone who builds a successful online business or invests wisely and retires early is viewed with suspicion because they didn't suffer enough to deserve their success. The programming also makes you believe that financial success requires sacrificing everything else that matters. You've been told countless stories about wealthy people who are miserable, lonely, and morally bankrupt. This creates a false choice between money and happiness, between financial success and meaningful relationships, between building wealth and being a good person. But here's what these stories conveniently ignore. Financial stress destroys more relationships than financial success ever could. Money problems are one of the leading causes of divorce, family conflict, and personal anxiety. The idea that having money makes you unhappy is usually promoted by people who have never actually had enough money to test that theory. The truth is that money amplifies who you already are. If you're generous with $5, you'll be generous with 5,000. If you're selfish with a small income, you'll be selfish with the large one. Money doesn't corrupt people. It simply gives people more power to express their existing character traits. Now, let's talk about the programming that keeps you focused on the wrong metrics entirely. You've been taught to measure financial success by your salary rather than your net worth, by your possessions rather than your assets, and by how much you can spend rather than how much you can save and invest. Look, recognizing these 7 programming patterns is uncomfortable, but it's the first step toward financial freedom. The system that taught you to stay broke is counting on you never questioning these beliefs. But now you know better. Start deprogramming yourself one decision at a time, because your future self will thank you for breaking free from the invisible chains that have kept you financially stuck your entire life.